Attention! You're about to learn one of the most surprising stories of the Vietnam War, a profound account based on rare documents and forgotten testimonies. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Now turn up the volume and dive into this investigation with us. The rain in Vietnam never seemed to stop during the monsoon season of 1967. What began as a routine deployment for the 3rd Platoon of the 370th Infantry Battalion would soon become one of the most classified incidents of the entire conflict. According to military records declassified only in 1984, 27 men of the platoon were attached to a French advisory unit operating in the Central Highlands, near the border with Laos. The mission was designated Operation Highland Torch, a name that appears in no official history of the Vietnam War. First Lieutenant James Wilson Harmon, a 28-year-old officer from Detroit, Michigan, commanded the all-black platoon. His service record, partially redacted in the National Archives, indicates he had served with distinction during the early phases of the conflict, but had been passed over for promotion twice. A handwritten note in his file, authored by Colonel Eugene Devereux, reads, "Exemplary tactician, but questions command decisions excessively. Transfer recommended." What followed was documented in a series of field reports and personal diaries that paint a troubling picture of the relationship between American and French forces in that forgotten corner of the war. Captain Philippe Marceau, a veteran of the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu 13 years earlier, commanded the joint operation. His second-in-command, Captain Henri Beaumont, had spent 6 years in Algeria before being reassigned to Vietnam as a military advisor. Both men had extensive combat experience. Both also carried the deep scars of France's colonial defeats. Upon arrival at Firebase Delta, our men were immediately separated from white units and assigned to perimeter guard duty exclusively, wrote Lieutenant Harmon in his field journal on May 17th. Captain Beaumont informed me that my men were not qualified for the reconnaissance operations we had been trained for. When I presented our unit's qualification records, he dismissed them without review. The firebase itself was a hastily constructed outpost 16 kilometers from the nearest significant American presence, surrounded by triple canopy jungle on 3 sides and a steep ravine on the 4th. It offered excellent defensive potential, but severely limited visibility. Radio communications were unreliable due to the mountainous terrain. For all practical purposes, Firebase Delta was isolated. Sergeant Major Isaiah Washington, the highest-ranking non-commissioned officer in the platoon, noted in his personal correspondence that the situation deteriorated rapidly. The French captains refused to learn our names. They address us only as boy or by pointing. Today, 3 of our men were reassigned to latrine duty despite having specialized communications training. Lieutenant Harmon filed a formal complaint, but I doubt it will leave this mountain. Private First Class Marcus Johnson, a 20-year-old radio operator from Philadelphia, kept a detailed account of daily operations. His small pocket notebook, recovered years later, reveals that the black soldiers were consistently assigned the most dangerous perimeter positions with the least cover. The French captain told Lieutenant Harmon that we were expendable assets. I heard it myself while manning the radio. The white soldiers get rotated every 4 hours. We stay out for 12. By the 4th week at Firebase Delta, tensions had reached a breaking point. A confrontation between Sergeant Washington and Captain Beaumont nearly escalated to violence after 3 black soldiers were denied medical evacuation for malaria symptoms. He would not authorize the helicopter without a white medical officer's confirmation, but our medic, Corporal Lewis, was deemed insufficient despite his qualifications. What happened next would later be described in a classified Pentagon review as an unauthorized tactical reorganization. On the night of June 8th, Lieutenant Harmon effectively split the command structure. placing his men under the direct leadership of Sergeant Washington while nominally maintaining the chain of command. Captain Beaumont suggested they were malingering, wrote Lieutenant Harmon. According to Private Johnson's notes, the LT told us to follow Sarge's orders first, then consider what the French captains want. We're on our own now. The situation might have continued this way indefinitely had intelligence reports not indicated a major enemy movement in the area. A North Vietnamese Army regiment was reportedly massing for an offensive aimed directly at Firebase Delta. Captain Marceau dismissed the reports as guerrilla posturing and maintained normal operational readiness. Captain Beaumont, according to multiple accounts, spent that evening drinking cognac in the officers' quarters. At 0200 hours on June 12th, Private First Class Johnson, positioned at the farthest listening post from the firebase, detected movement in the valley below. His log entry, written in a shaky hand, reads, "Multiple contacts, moving in formation, not locals. Carrying heavy weapons, at least company strength." He immediately radioed the information to Sergeant Washington rather than the main command post, following Lieutenant Harmon's revised protocols. What followed was a quiet mobilization that likely saved the entire battalion. Without alerting the French command, Sergeant Washington positioned his men according to a defensive plan they had rehearsed in secret. Lieutenant Harmon later wrote, "I made the decision to prepare for imminent attack without Marceau's authorization. If I was wrong, my career was finished. If I was right and did nothing, we would all be dead by dawn." Are you following so far? Help us bring this story to more people. Like the video, comment if you already knew about this case, and subscribe to the channel. Now, we return to the point where everything changed. The attack began precisely at 0300 hours. According to the official after-action report, 3 companies of North Vietnamese regulars, supported by heavy mortars, struck Firebase Delta from 2 directions simultaneously. The French command post was hit in the opening barrage, killing 3 radio operators and wounding Captain Marceau. Captain Beaumont, by multiple accounts, froze in the chaos of the initial assault. It was at this crucial moment that the true significance of Lieutenant Harmon's unauthorized tactical reorganization became clear. The black soldiers, already positioned according to Sergeant Washington's defensive plan, held their fire until the attacking forces were fully committed. "We let them get within 50 meters, wrote Private Johnson. Then Sergeant Washington gave the signal, and we opened up from all positions simultaneously. The effect was devastating. The defensive strategy employed that night would later be studied at West Point as a textbook example of small unit tactics. Rather than manning a traditional perimeter, Lieutenant Harmon had created multiple interlocking fields of fire with carefully planned fallback positions. Most critically, he had positioned 3 machine gun teams on elevated platforms, giving them commanding views of the likely avenues of approach. Corporal Elijah Lewis, the unit medic who had been deemed insufficient by Captain Beaumont, distinguished himself by moving between positions under heavy fire to treat the wounded. His actions would later earn him a Silver Star, though the citation would make no mention of the circumstances that preceded the battle. "The white soldiers looked at us differently after that night," he wrote to his brother. "Funny how bullets change people's minds." By dawn, the attack had been repelled, with estimated enemy casualties exceeding 150. The firebase had suffered 23 wounded and 7 killed, a remarkably low number given the force they had faced. As the sun rose over the jungle canopy, Captain Marceau, nursing a shrapnel wound to his shoulder, requested a formal briefing from Lieutenant Harmon. What transpired in that meeting was recorded only in Lieutenant Harmon's personal journal, which remained sealed in military archives until 2001. Captain Marceau asked me directly how we had been so prepared. I told him the truth, that we had ignored his standing orders and implemented our own defensive strategy. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You saved this battalion, Lieutenant. I was wrong, about your men." Captain Beaumont's reaction was markedly different. According to multiple witnesses, he attempted to have Lieutenant Harmon arrested for insubordination immediately following the battle. The charge was quietly dismissed after intervention from higher command. In his only documented comment on the matter, Beaumont wrote in his official report, "The success of the defense, while commendable, does not excuse the breakdown of proper command protocols." In the days that followed, Firebase Delta was reinforced and expanded. The black soldiers of the 3rd Platoon were integrated into regular rotation schedules. Captain Marceau, according to Sergeant Washington's account, made a point of learning each man's name and background. He asked about our families, our homes, simple human things that shouldn't be remarkable but somehow were. The events at Firebase Delta might have remained a footnote in the complex history of the Vietnam War had it not been for the actions of a junior intelligence officer at the Pentagon. Lieutenant Colonel James Whitaker, reviewing action reports from the Central Highlands in 1972, noticed inconsistencies in the accounts of the June 12th battle. His subsequent investigation uncovered the full narrative, including the systematic discrimination faced by the black soldiers and their ultimate vindication. Whitaker compiled his findings into a comprehensive report titled Command Failures and Racial Integration, Case Study Firebase Delta. The report was immediately classified and remained so for nearly 3 decades. When asked why he pursued the investigation despite institutional resistance, Whitaker reportedly said, "Because the truth matters, especially when it's uncomfortable." In 1976, a French military historian named Claude Bernier began researching a book on French advisory operations in Vietnam. During his research, he interviewed Captain Marceau, then retired and living outside Paris. The transcript of that interview provides a remarkable epilogue to the Firebase Delta incident. "Those men saved us all," Marceau told Bernier. "I had spent my career believing certain things about American Negro soldiers, things I had been told by my American counterparts. That night showed me the cost of such prejudice." Captain Beaumont never publicly acknowledged the events as described by others. He returned to France in late 1967 and left military service the following year. His personal papers, donated to the French military archives upon his death in 1994, contain only one reference to Firebase Delta, a single page with the notation, "Tactical decisions compromised by political considerations." Outcome fortunate, but principles compromised. The men of the 3rd Platoon continued their tour of duty, eventually rotating back to the United States in March 1968. Their subsequent service records show a remarkable pattern. Of the 22 who survived the deployment, 17 remained in the military, with 11 eventually becoming officers themselves. Lieutenant Harmon retired as a full colonel in 1985, having served as an instructor at the Army Command and General Staff College. In 2004, a reunion of Firebase Delta veterans was held in Washington, D.C. Among the attendees was a frail Philippe Marceau, making his final journey from France to honor the men he had once dismissed. According to witnesses, he embraced each of the surviving black veterans, repeating simply, "Thank you for my life." Sergeant Major Isaiah Washington, by then in his 70s, spoke briefly at the event. His words, recorded for a military oral history project, provide perhaps the most fitting summary of what occurred at Firebase Delta. "We didn't fight that night for recognition. We didn't fight to prove anything to the French captains. We fought because that's what soldiers do. They protect their own, regardless of color. The real victory wasn't against the North Vietnamese. It was against the prejudice that had followed us across the ocean." The Firebase Delta incident received brief media attention following the reunion, but quickly faded from public consciousness. The classified files were finally fully declassified in 2009, but by then, most of the participants had passed away. Lieutenant Harmon's journal, perhaps the most complete record of the events, was donated to the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture by his daughter. Among the final entries in that journal, dated December 25, 1967, is this reflection: "What happened at Firebase Delta is both exceptional and ordinary. Exceptional because we overcame not just an enemy force, but the barriers placed before us by those who should have been our allies. Ordinary because black soldiers have been doing this since the Revolution, fighting with distinction despite being told they are less than equal. I wonder when the lesson will finally be learned." In a military report authored in 1984, Brigadier General Marcus Johnson, the same man who had been a young radio operator at Firebase Delta, recommended the inclusion of the incident in officer training curriculum. His recommendation was denied on the grounds that revisiting such incidents serves no constructive purpose for modern integrated forces. Johnson's response, appended to the denied request, was succinct: "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The story of Firebase Delta remains largely unknown outside specialized military history circles. The valor of the men who served there, their ability to overcome both enemy fire and institutional prejudice, has never been formally recognized with unit citations or commendations. The French advisory role in Vietnam during this period has been similarly minimized in official histories of the conflict. Perhaps the most telling postscript comes from a letter written by Captain Marceau to Lieutenant Harmon in 1981, found among Harmon's personal effects after his death. "I have lived with our shared experience for many years now. I have come to believe that what happened at Firebase Delta was not just about military tactics or even racial prejudice. It was about the capacity of men to change, to see beyond what they have been taught. You did not just save lives that night, you saved souls." The tactical innovations developed by Lieutenant Harmon and Sergeant Washington were quietly incorporated into Army field manuals in the 1970s, though without attribution. Military historians who have studied the battle note that their defensive approach, particularly the use of interlocking fields of fire from elevated positions, represented a significant departure from conventional doctrine of the time. In 2011, a doctoral student at Howard University named Michelle Jefferson began researching the Firebase Delta incident for her dissertation on the experience of black soldiers in Vietnam. Her interviews with surviving family members revealed a consistent theme. The men who returned from Firebase Delta rarely spoke about what had happened there. "My father never talked about Vietnam," the daughter of Corporal Lewis told Jefferson. "The only thing he ever said was that he once had to save some men who didn't think he was good enough to treat their wounds." The last known survivor of the 3rd Platoon, Staff Sergeant William Morris, died in 2017 at the age of 78. In a recorded oral history, completed a year before his death, he offered this perspective. "People ask if I'm angry about what happened, about how we were treated. I tell them anger doesn't last 50 years. But memory does, and it's important that someone remembers not just what we faced, but what we overcame." The Firebase Delta incident represents a microcosm of the larger struggles faced by black soldiers throughout American military history, from the Revolutionary War through the World Wars and beyond. Their service, often rendered while facing discrimination from within their own ranks, speaks to a particular kind of courage. Not just the bravery to face an enemy, but the fortitude to maintain dignity and professionalism when those around you question your very worth. As Captain Marceau wrote in his final communication with Colonel Harmon, "The true test of a soldier is not how he fights when everything is in his favor, but how he performs when every hand is against him. By that measure, your men were the finest soldiers I ever encountered." Did you enjoy this story? Your support helps us continue producing new documentaries. A like, comment, or share makes all the difference. See more historical cases on our channel, and if you're not already subscribed, join our community. I'll see you in the next episode.